Hey there, this is the start of a video on a little more information on making the buttonhole, and this is a result of a chance encounter I had yesterday. I was out at the BC Highland Games, I'd done my presentation, I'd found the beer tent, I had a pint, I was a happy lad, and this chap walks up to me and introduces himself, and he said that he'd been following my videos, and that he was wearing a kilt that he'd made from my videos, and he showed me a bunch of pictures. I think he's done 2 kilts now. And so we had a pleasant chat, and it was wonderful, because that's why I do this, is so that people will pick up the needle and thread and do it, right? So we had, so we had a bit of back and forth, and he asked some questions about the buttonhole, and I says, well, do you want some more information? Do you want another video? And he said, yes. So here we are. So here I am. This is the McRae tartan, and I've just about finished. In fact, I have finished making all my chalk marks on this before I reduce it to height and start sewing, as is counted everywhere. But I'm going to show you exactly, step by step, how I make that buttonhole, right from the first mark to finish sewing. So these marks are the left-hand edge at hip and waist of my front apron. This is my mark. This is my very first pleat. So my first step, because I do all my marking before I reduce it in length, because after we tear the top strip off, we have a raw edge. And this cloth is very good. Dalgleish cloth is the best, of course, and it'll lose a yarn or maybe 2 before it sort of self-seals. I mean, if you keep beating it up, it'll lose a few more yarns, but other cloths, you can lose quite a bit. So I do all my marking before I reduce it in height. So the first stage is, the length of the kilt is 23. So at that position of that first apron, I mark, there's the finished length of the kilt. This is waist cloth. This is the kilt itself. From there I cleverly drop my tape measure. From there I measure 2.5 inches down, because I found over all these years that this seems to be the median for an adult male, is 2.5 inches down from the top, this being the natural waist. Of course, it depends on a case-by-case basis, which is why I measure every client, because occasionally it has to be a little shorter, but that's the subject for another video. Total length is 8.5, so that's my second mark, so third mark. So I marked the length, I've marked 2.5 inches down, which represents the center line of the strap and buckle. And while I'm at it, I got the chalk and the pens, the cloth yard in my hand. I mark, okay, there's the bottom of the fell. We don't have to worry about that right now. So there's my first pleat. My second pleat is here, because it's always a good idea, especially with a busy tartan like this, and I just said this in the other video, is mark where your pleat actually goes, because it's fatally easy to make a mistake and get confused in all of this detail. So here we are again, pleat number 2. 23 inches, 2.5 inches. There, now there, first pleat, second pleat, and we've marked the center of the strap. My next step, I have a gauge, and in this case, it's a strap cut. It was bought from L&M back in the days when they were providing straps that were really, really heavy. I haven't bought straps from them for a while. I'm not sure if they're, but this is like super heavy, and I keep it as a gauge. So what I do, because it's got very large buckle holes, I feed it through and I locate the buckle holes on that chalk line I just put. And I'm going to do a contrasting color. Right? So there's my buttonhole on the first pleat, and I repeat it again here. Here's my buttonhole on the second pleat. So there's our first step. The next step, after I reduce it and I start sewing, because again, I start sewing first pleat to second pleat. I don't sew the apron in place until the end, because if I get a little bit of error here or whatever reason, it's easier for me to just adjust the apron rather than otherwise. So my next step is I'm going to be marking. Now I've mislaid my my gauges, so I'm not going to mark my, let's just do a hypothetical mark here. I'm going to mark my width of the pleats at waist and hip, And these are just about spot on. This one is 13/16, and this one is 7/8. And it just coincides with, pardon me, this yellow line, sorry, I beg your pardon, I've obviously gone colorblind, this red line and this green line. I'm going to do the same there. Now I'm going to come back with my gauges, which I apparently just mislaid just this second ago, and mark them properly. But from here I'm going to reduce this in height, pin pleat number 1 to pleat number 2, and start sewing. And of course I start at the bottom of the fell. I sew up to just shy of this yellow line here, and I overcast it half a dozen times, and then I backstitch, and then I sew it again. But I will show you that tomorrow when I'm actually doing it, and that'll be part 2 of this video. So thank you, and carry on. Hey, it's a few minutes later. It's part 2 of the buttonhole video. Now what I've done, as you can see, following the previous video, I've reduced it in height. I've ripped down to the finished length of the kilt, 23 inches. And then I marked with my gauges, which of course I immediately found the second the camera was turned off and my son had gone off to do his own thing. So I've marked the width of each pleat at waist and hip. And now I've brought the first pleat over and pinned it next to the second pleat. And because I'm working in pretty fine tolerances here, the difference between the width of the pleat here, in this particular kilt at least, here and here is only 1/16 of an inch. It's literally the width of a chalk line. So, but in any case, regardless of what the taper is, having brought it in place, I put my first pin here, and then the second pin here to make sure, because remember the pleats are parallel. On a man's kilt, the pleats are parallel from the center of the strap hole to the top. On a female's kilt, they taper from the bottom to the top, but man's kilt, they taper to this point, the center of the strap, and then they're parallel thenceforth. So that's the reason why I do the first pin, second pin. I do the third pin down here at the bottom of the fell, and then, can't do it right now because I'm holding the camera with one hand, I stretch the cloth a little bit. I pull it snug, one hand holding at the end of the taper, one hand holding at the beginning of the taper at the bottom of the fell, and I pull them so that the cloth in between forms a straight line, and that's how I get my taper. And then when I'm satisfied with that, again, tug it, pull it tight. I don't tug it, but I pull it snug, and the cloth sort of conforms and adopts the necessary taper, and then I pin it in place in the middle. Now, I will try to film the next thing because the next step, because there's a very good chance my son won't be around. But yeah, so my next step is to start sewing at the bottom of the fell, sewing, and I don't come right up to the line. I'll stop. I'll back off about, let's say, 1/8 of an inch or so. I'll sew to within 1/8 of the line. I'll overcast it a number of times with maybe an overhand knot or two as I overcast the stitch, and then do a series of back stitches up here and then sew down. So that'll be the next part of the video, which will probably be shot tomorrow. Cheers. It's a few minutes later-ish, and I've cut out the fish. And again, this was in response to a conversation with somebody at the Highland Games, and it's made me more conscious about leaving enough space between the fell, represented with that yellow chalk line there, and the top of the fish. So I've given it a good 1.5 inches, and I cut it to this line because the fellow had cut his a little bit too close in one kilt, and he was absolutely determined not to do that again. So as you can see, again, the chalk marks I've put on the piece that's about to be cut. So I'm just going to quickly flip it over here. And again, white line for cutting, yellow chalk for, hey, pay attention here kind of thing. So this is the way I do it. I cut it down because my canvases are always 5 inches wide. So this is just a hair over 5 inches. And the tip of my scissors is just coming up against the seam. So I'm just backing off just a hair to where that chalk line is. This chalk line represents the right-hand edge of this seam, and this is just, I just did this to be a little on the other side. So there we go. There's my buttonhole, but I don't want it like this, right? I want a slight overlap. So to that end, remember I made that chalk line, and I do this one layer at a time, because I'm always worried about cutting multiple layers of cloth at the same time. And you can see the proper way of using the scissors. If we're taking short snips, we're doing it at this end, not this end, which I've explained elsewhere. Okay, that one's done. Now we do being extraordinarily careful, because if I cut through the outer layer, I might as well just give up and work in the back. I would be done. I'd have to start the whole, I have to buy a new piece of cloth. So it's all about paying attention. So you can see, right? Now it looks like I have to do one more. Now I just did this in the reverse order of the previous one, and I don't think it really matters, as long as you're mindful of what's going on. Okay. Okay, it just needs a little bit more in this one. These are dull scissors, they're not my best scissors. So that's about even thickness. It's a bit of a bump there. Okay, that's good, because now you can see my next stage. I'm just doing this very quickly because our dinner's on the table upstairs. Is the next stage would be I sew the steeking, but then when I lay the canvas in, see, the canvas is right up to the fold, and there's a bit of an overlap. Let's say it's 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. There's a bit of an overlap, and the canvas is right up against it. Now I keep it this wide because in future, if this person or the descendant of this person is taller or shorter, or this person needs an alteration, we can move that strap down almost a full width and up a full width to adjust for the length of the kilt, right? And then later on I'll show you, you may have seen before, but I'll carry on with this. The next piece of this is the canvas that goes straight across to the inside apron. The outside canvas for the outside apron is laid in there so that they're overlapping a tiny bit and then laid out. So there we are. That's the next stage, and I'll report back when I got something new to say. Thank you.